And you too, Sandra. I suspect it probably goes that far. Okay, I said I started out by, or I noted that I don't make any accommodation for the readings. That the readings are hard and arduous. They're like eating kale. It doesn't taste very good, but good for you. However, I did actually change one reading, and that was the first reading. I originally had an article entitled something like "The Roman Grain Trade" by an Oxford professor named Rittman, and I got rid of that reading because it presupposed a few things like you spoke fluent Latin, and you were probably a professor of classics somewhere. So not ideal MBA material. And I replaced it with this result that you have, and you won't say anything about it, or whatever. So I went home and wrote a version, tried to write a version of my own. And I spent a summer then, or a couple of weeks in a summer, surrounded by all these books about the Roman grain trade, and I produced this sort of, hopefully, somewhat more readable. I mean, it may not be great, but let me tell you, much better than the written, right? I cut out all the Latin, right? And I like to ask the question, why would I do such a thing? Why was this a good use of my summer vacation? Why would I want to give you 20 pages on Roman grain trade? What is the value for you? So I'd like to start by just sort of asking a general question. What are some of the bigger points here, the salient points that come from this reading that we would like to bring to the fore that we think might be worth addressing? What are some of the things from this reading that you think are of interest to us? Yes, Santiago.
Yeah, I think it's about complex system. As management, you have to take into consideration always how many different variables affect a system. So it's a very difficult skill to develop, and it's a way of thinking.
Okay, the complexity of the system and thinking through that brings its own value. Yes, sir.
I think it's more like about planning, understanding how big you grow. The more things you have to be careful about it, and I think this is what it's all about. You know? In my opinion, they kindly think and they precisely think what they should do, but very carefully taken.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, Veronica.
When you have restrictions, there's always a way to go away and find another way to do it, and just not stick to the common thing.
You can always find a solution to your
Not
problems.
always.
Except for this class, unfortunately, you have to sit through it. Yes, in the back.
I think it's about the resources, how they fit together in the complex system, like in the Roman, the buyers, the local suppliers.
Management of resources, yeah, absolutely. What else? Yes, Guillermo.
I think it's more about how complex systems share characteristics over time in the long run, and not necessarily about avoiding the problems, but just knowing that historically there has been a process and an outcome, and being prepared for it.
Okay, yeah, and because we know that the history repeats itself, and history illuminates the present, and so on. These are all true. But why Rome? Why would I mean, my Latin is not very good. Why would I suffer through Rome?
Because it's an apparently anomaly, because at that time, most of the European cities wouldn't grow beyond 100 population, and Rome had 1 million, so it's an anomaly.
Yes, that's exactly right. Rome attracts our attention in part because of this very anomalous result. It's a city that is much greater than it should be. Normally you would think in an environment like this, a city of that size would be unsustainable. And certainly unsustainable over the period of time that Rome itself survived. We're talking about a city that was, for many hundreds of years, possibly 500 years, able to be a city of 1 million people or thereabouts, which is an order of magnitude greater than what a big city would have been in this time, and can sustain that for a very long period of time. So that's certainly true. The anomaly of Rome draws attention to what's going on. And why is that important? What does that tell us about what we're seeing here, the size of Rome? What does it allow us to conclude?
It did things differently other than what other cities did. It had systems and interdependence and complexities that were built into the city that were vastly different and more unique.
So the first thing is, it definitely invites us to look at what they're doing. But the science gives us something else. It gives us a conclusion that we can make. As we know, there's a lot of ambiguity, lack of historical evidence. But the fact that success. Is that what you're going to say? Yeah. Whatever it is we're looking at, and we're going to look at it in a couple of ways, but whatever it is we're looking at, we know it was successful. Rome produced a very optimal outcome, the most optimal outcome in doing what it did context of this market, because it produced this extraordinary, exceptional result. So whatever it is we get, whatever conclusions we take away from the functioning of this market, whatever we see working in this market, we know that it was the best thing to do, because it produced this exceptional and anomalous result. It cannot be underscored enough how truly unusual it was to be able to sustain a city of that size with the need for importation of that scale for that long. It is a historically exceptional achievement. Even other cities like Baghdad and Siam, which may have attained populations of close to 1 million in the pre-modern period, did not sustain them for anything like the time that Rome did, and moreover were the beneficiaries of a catchment area of much greater fertility, Baghdad between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, for example. And yet here's Rome in this relatively infertile part of the Italian peninsula, able to maintain a population that requires dependence upon a complex supply chain, and able to maintain that population for almost half a millennium. So it's an exceptional achievement. Yes, Carla?
And as well, I think that even there's no enough information in this complex system to work successfully. I think the dynamics of the parties, it was relied on trustworthiness on each one of them.
Well, so now you're anticipating one of the things that we need to ask, right? Which is that if we, here we have this description of the Roman system, and we know that the ability to sustain a population of 1 million people meant that Rome was dependent upon any number of complex supply chains. We're focusing on grain, but as noted in the reading, olive oil too, much of which came from southern Spain, also critical for the survival of the population. So we're looking at a problem, we're looking at a market problem, we're looking at an issue of how this market functioned, and if we strip the market to its particulars, if we consider it in the abstract, what does this market look like? The first place that we arrive, the first condition that presents itself to us, is a real conundrum. We're looking at a market which is characterized by persistent informational uncertainty, right? In part, we see informational asymmetries, which is to say, uneven distribution of information between partners in a transactional relationship. But even beyond informational asymmetries, we're often seeing no information at all. The market simply doesn't have any information available to us, or to it. And we know from basic economics, I mean, it's a basic economic principle, a market that is characterized by a lack of information is a market that cannot function, right? That invites market failure, because there's a correlation. Market efficiency, information available to the market, the more we take away information, the less efficient the market can become. Here we have an enormous amount of information taken out of the market, and yet we have a very, very efficient market. We know that the market was highly efficient. Why? Because Rome was 1 million people. And you don't get a city of 1 million people under these circumstances unless the market is operating at almost optimal efficiency. So it's a conundrum for us. How does this happen? How do we explain this bizarre result? That what economics tells us, that there should be market failure here, market collapse, or just a non-functioning market to begin with, nonetheless produces this exceptional outcome.